So it is October, the month of mental health and ADD awareness. I thought I'd make a video about my experiences. My journey is very much still happening, but I'm hoping that sharing what I'm going through will be cathartic for myself and helpful for other people. Maybe you'll see yourself in my experiences and think about getting a professional opinion, or if you have already been diagnosed, I'm hoping that maybe you'll just feel less alone in what you're going through. If you want to know more about the exact kind of symptoms of ADD, you can look that up online, but in this video I'm going to talk about my experience and how it affected me in my life. Because as with most mental health conditions, there's no blood markers to test for, you don't get a letter in the mail, and certainly a big bearded burly man doesn't kick down your door in the middle of the night and declare, "Ricky, you're depressed." My diagnosis with ADD came quite late in my life, at 30. I know, baby face. But for this video, I'm going to rewind back to the start. In primary school and high school, I was quite normal, and by that I mean I was a pain in the ass, loud and distracting others. I was the class clown. I either showed a lot of interest or no interest at all. And the regular feedback from all of my teachers was that I was underachieving and not reaching my full potential. And for the most part, no one raised the issue of ADD at all. Where my interest did lie was in playing soccer, riding my scooter, computer games, and Linkin Park. Mad dog. I did apply myself in high school, but definitely not to the best of my ability, and I passed with pretty average marks, but I was able to get into uni where the same kind of momentum continued. At this time in my life, I got two more hobbies, working out seriously, and my girlfriend. Alpha dog. I had a relatively cruisy life, but then things kind of went to shit. The girlfriend and I broke up. I graduated in the GFC and was unable to find work, which is really hard. And also someone that I knew since high school unexpectedly passed away. This was a very tough and defining period of my life, which I wrote about in my book, Living in Cream. And here's how it describes it. My walls weren't just closing in, they came down. I was seeing the world in a new light, as a world with no light. Deep dog. Now, everyone reacts to circumstances in their life differently, but I definitely had little to no resilience. I immediately went into depression. This was expressed as in always feeling tired, kind of like a ghost floating through life, wanting to sleep a lot, and just no longer having an optimistic view of myself or the future. Cliche as it sounds, the color drained from my life, and everything was just grey. Because of stigma around mental health conditions and also just denial, I didn't seek professional help, but I did pour myself into the online world and started talking to people on online forums. This is where I also started learning about philosophy, spirituality, Buddhism, and different kind of coping strategies that I could incorporate into my own life. I wrote about all of these in my book, which you can check out in the link below. But for the most part, things turned pretty good. I had my depression under control and I moved further on into my 20s and started working full time. But there was still another problem, which I didn't know at the time, but it was my ADD. This looked like constantly being mentally fatigued at work, feeling drained, even falling asleep. I even told my workplace that I was a diabetic just so I could take naps during lunch. I was getting distracted and seeming to make a lot of tiny mistakes. I couldn't understand it. I was this passionate, focus-driven person outside of work, but at work it was a real chore to be there. I considered that I just wasn't in the right job and workplace, but having studied for 4 years and gone through so many job applications, I worked so hard to get here and I didn't want to go back. So I decided I would just stick things out. I would occasionally get a bit down about not having a job that I was really engaged in or having a prestigious job title or making progress in my career, but I'd work around these feelings by focusing on my hobbies and the things that I really did love. At this time in my life, I did actually have 2 new hobbies, which included dancing and writing and recording raps in my bedroom closet. Rap dog. I kind of just wanted more out of my working life, and I had a feeling that there had to be more. So I went looking for it, and one of the perks of having ADD and having a hunter's wiring is that when presented with problems, you can be pretty out there with your solutions. I scored myself a position in a volunteer program and got placed overseas on the little island of Tonga in the South Pacific. And then because of my interest in writing and mental health and well-being, I was able to move to Sydney and Melbourne and work with some of Australia's leading mental health organisations. I was finally working in an area of interest, which was great. But after a while, the same problems started happening. I was finding myself tired, cognitively drained, zoning out, and making tons of tiny mistakes, and unable to stay on top of my workload. I went to see a doctor, and after doing blood tests and being unable to figure out why I was kind of stuck in this brain fog, he pretty much threw out the idea that, yeah, hey, you're depressed. I disagreed with this because previously with depression, I knew that it was reactive to circumstances in my life and things were pretty good for me. So I thought, nah, that's not it. And what I decided to do was just to try harder, which is a problem that a lot of ADD people have. The turning point then came, which was me unfortunately losing my job for my performance issues. I had this great personality and people loved to be around me, but I just couldn't stay on top of everything and I was making all these tiny mistakes all the time. In typical ADD fashion, I internalized all that blame and shame, and it really should have been a breaking point for me, but I'd come so far in my life that I wasn't going to give up that easily. I was determined to figure out what the hell is going on. I jumped online and came across ADD. I hadn't really heard about it before. This is despite working in the mental health sector for 2 years, being interested in mental health and well-being for a previous, 5-6 years, and even having spoken to psychologists and counselors personally in my life. No one had ever raised the possibility of ADD or even thrown out the idea that I might have it. I felt really let down by the system. I went on to read this book called Scattered Minds by Dr. Gabor, and in all of his stories where he details the experiences of people with ADD, I saw myself in all of them. That one really hit home for me. Suddenly my whole life was making sense, from my addictive personality, the way I'd throw myself into hobbies, and then my inability to stay organized, overlooking tiny mistakes, and just always being cognitively tired from focusing on one task for too long. But of course, your subjective experience is not enough to get diagnosed. You need to see a professional, which I then went on to do. I booked in an appointment with a psychiatrist. I waited 2 months, rocked up at 4:45 on a Friday afternoon, and unfortunately it was over within 10 minutes. He hardly listened to me and pretty much just said, no, you don't have it. I was crushed. I felt really let down again, but I didn't give up. I booked an appointment to get a second opinion with someone else, and this psychiatrist was great. He really took the time to listen to me. He asked me about my childhood, my present life, and then he requested that I either bring in my school report cards or a statement by somebody who had known me for my entire life. As with ADD, you can't just have the symptoms in present day. They have to be present in your entire life. Luckily, my parents did have my high school and primary school report cards, so I was able to bring them in. We did speak about depression, but we established that depression is a comorbid condition that often occurs with ADD, especially when it is undiagnosed. Because when you feel unengaged with what you do and out of place in the world, and often like myself have a long history of making fuck-ups, of course you're going to feel pretty down. He also wanted to rule out bipolar 2 because I did have kind of periods in my life where I feel up and then down. But we did establish that with bipolar 2 and ADD, although they are similar in that way, my ups and downs are more related to how engaged I was with things in my life at the current time, particularly my creative hobbies. If I had something that I was working on, I was up. If I didn't have anything that I was looking forward to or really involved in, then I was down. We ruled out bipolar 2 by actually giving me a mood stabilizer medication, which is for bipolar 2. After I didn't respond to it and I still had ADD distractibility symptoms, then I was able to get my official ADD diagnosis. You live your entire life trying to understand yourself and really feeling out of place in the world, so a diagnosis is a huge step and milestone. But in many ways, it is just the beginning of another journey. From here, you can experience either denial or regret and grief. I experienced regret and grief. I experienced grief for the life that I could be living if I was diagnosed earlier, and I experienced regret over not getting diagnosed earlier, particularly that I could still have my job if I was diagnosed. I had to remind myself that the events in our life are lined up like dominoes. Pull any event out, good or bad, and the whole chain stops. As much as losing my job sucked, it did play an important role in getting to me where I was today and getting diagnosed. From here, I started medication, onto my 4th and possibly moving on to my 5th, which kind of sucks. At times, it feels like I'm just stumbling around in the dark, trying to take educated guesses. What I do is keep a log which tracks my side effects and benefits and the symptoms that I experience, and doing this allows me to report back to my psychiatrist every few weeks, and then from there we can make a decision as to whether the medication needs to be upped or changed. I found stimulants to be immediately effective, but they gave me side effects, so I've then moved on to non-stimulants. ADD can be treated without medication with behavioral strategies and changes in your life, but it ultimately is a neurological condition, so it's kind of like needing glasses to focus. I wrote a blog post about this, which I'll link below. Dr. Gabor says that treatment of ADD is very much an internal one as well, and I wholeheartedly agree with this. I often have to forgive myself for mistakes in my past, accept my limits in the present, and plan for my future in a way that I'm flowing with the stream instead of going against it. Just like classroom wasn't the environment for me, I'm finally accepting that a cubicle isn't either. I'm looking towards a career change and looking for environments that can suit me and roles that are better suited towards my strengths. So I'm not trying to cram a circle peg into a square hole. I've started studying counseling this year, and I'm finding that it's a lot easier to study for something when you're actually interested in it. I'm very much still the class clown, but I also contribute useful stuff too. Since getting diagnosed, things have definitely gotten better. My medication has given me a glimpse as to what normal is, and my label, it doesn't define me, it's just given me more understanding of myself and kind of given me a way to relate to other people. I've learned that I'm not alone in what I'm experiencing or going through, and I hope after watching this video, you feel a little bit less alone too. My final tips. Number 1, don't rely on medical professionals. Do your own research as well. As you saw in my story, no one told me about ADD. It was something that I had to bring up and to really push to get a diagnosis. Number 2, don't be afraid of labels. They don't define you. They just help you to understand yourself and to make better decisions. Number 3, join communities, whether in person or online, because sometimes you don't need that professional opinion or advice. All you need to know is that you're not alone in what you're going through and to be listened to. Tip 4, and the last one, is prioritize your mental health and well-being. I think we live in a world where people talk about status, accomplishments, and everything else, but what's going on in here? If you need to, say no, take self-care days, and avoid the things that aren't good for you, and focus on the things that are. For me, they include creativity, spending time with friends, eating well, exercising, and getting out into nature when I can. And that's my video, my mental health and ADD journey. I really hope it's been helpful in some way. If you have questions, drop them below and I'll do my best to answer. The blog is where you can check out my writings and my book, and I will hopefully catch you in another video soon. Peace. And the world's gonna